Ananda has been a part of my life for my entire life. I got so tired of people telling me in Los Angeles that they thought I must be an old soul until I finally came up with what I feel is an appropriate rebuttal to that, which is that just means I didn't make it out last time, and maybe all of my other peers are. And so maybe I'm the dunce of the group. It's not useful to think in those terms, but I am deeply grateful that I've had the karma in this incarnation to be kind of born and bred in the briar patch from the beginning. You know, one thing that I will just share my gratitude for, because this is something we all share, is we really have been blessed with such an incredible gold mine in all of those great souls who have come before us on this path. Swami, obviously, and Master, and all of our Kriya masters, but also like all the living saints of Ananda, so to speak. But I just had the privilege of growing up among them, and I benefited from the saying, it takes a village to raise a child, but I also had the benefit of being raised by a village of yogis. But really, all of us are spiritual children who are trying to grow up. And so the more I understand the spiritual path and attunement, really all of us can have a spiritual upbringing, so to speak, by consciously attuning to the great examples of the devotees who have come before us. So though, yes, I may have been born into it, in a sense, we're all born into it because we're all in this family together. I'm grateful to be talking about chanting and devotion because it's something that's dear to my heart, and I think dear to every heart, as a matter of fact. And before we pray, I'll just give us a little reminder, because if anyone's a little bit like me, sometimes it's easy to slip into subconscious prayer, but let's take this as an opportunity to feel the devotion of our hearts yearning for God, and then allowing that energy to rise naturally like a weightless balloon up to the spiritual eye. And that is true prayer, just the heart's aspiration for God. And we'll put words to that aspiration, coaxing it with our love, with our care, with our attention, to help burst the little spark of love into the flames of bliss. But first, let's pray simply with our energy, with our magnetism. And then as we repeat these words, let's feel that this moment is independent of every moment that has ever come before and any moment that will ever come in the future, and that this is a unique, individual expression of timelessness where you get to declare your love for the infinite beloved. So with that in mind, let's pray. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, dearest friend, our beloved God, great masters of Kriya Yoga, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Gurudeva, Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, and our friend Swamiji, we humbly invoke your presence today. O Divine Mother, steal into our hearts, awaken within us our own latent devotion, reveal to us your supernal sweetness, your infinite kindness, your divine beauty and love. Help us to engross our consciousness on your presence, until at last, Mother, we become one with thee. Om Peace. Amen. Let's chant together Yogananda's chant, Thou art my life. And let's really feel, close your eyes and feel that you are chanting this to your divine beloved. And imagine, if you would, that you are courting your divine beloved. That how much energy would you use, how much sweetness would you imbue in your words if you were courting your human beloved, let alone your divine beloved. And let's let this be the soul's, Yogananda said, love is the song of the soul singing to God. And let's sing to God like that. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do seek. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do seek. In the thought by my love brought, in the thought by my love brought, I taste thy name, so sweet, so sweet. Devotee knows how sweet you are. Devotee knows how sweet Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do seek. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do seek. In the thought by my love brought, in the thought by my love brought, I taste thy name, so sweet, so sweet. Devotee knows how sweet you are. Devotee knows how sweet you are. He knows whom you let know. He knows whom you let know. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do seek. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do seek. In the thought by my love brought, in the thought by my love brought, I taste thy name, so sweet, so sweet. Devotee knows how sweet you are. Devotee knows how sweet you are. He knows whom you let know. He knows whom you let know. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do seek. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do seek. In the thought by my love brought, in the thought by my love brought, I taste thy name, so sweet, so sweet. Devotee knows how sweet you are. 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 He knows whom you let know. He knows whom you let know. He knows whom you let know. So I was thinking about this topic of the divine romance because this has been one that's been dear to my heart the last few months, and it's been a convenient time to be exploring this. As a budding astrologer, I happen to know that the planet Venus, which is representative of the heart chakra, has been in her own sign Taurus for the last number of months. And so even amidst all the turmoil and the tumult of the world, there has been an undercurrent for me of heart opening and of a search for the divine beauty, for the divine love. And it's been a very dear quest to be going on. You know, it's always beautiful to go deeper into these things, but what an imperative time to be opening our hearts as devotees. There's really, there's no greater power than the power of an open heart and the power of a heart attuned to the ray of divine love. It's the greatest protection that we have. Like I mentioned in astrology, often people come to you wanting you to be like a spiritual weatherman, to tell them what's coming, what has come, what will be their future. It's going to be rainy in 7 years. There's going to be lightning storms. And if you better do this and bring your umbrella. But that's really not very interesting from a yogi's perspective, because as Krishna puts it in the Bhagavad Gita, the true yogi does not differentiate between pleasure and pain, that he accepts all with indifference because he sees all as coming from God. And so in astrology and in our own lives, it's less interesting to become a weather man as it is to become a weather maker. But we don't have the power to be a weather maker, a karma maker, a world shaker. But the divine does. Our divine beloved does. The guru does. And if we want to be a channel for that divine power, we have to learn to open and receive it. As you know, we've all have heard thousands of times, like it says in the Bible, to all those who received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God. And that's what devotion is. Devotion is learning to open your heart like solar panels to receive that omnipresent power of God through the heart, through love. And that love will not only transform you personally, but will give you the grace to act on behalf of the masters for this world. We as humans, with our own limited power, are really quite minuscule and our capacity to affect any positive change. Unfortunately, that's sort of my opinion. Like, I often think about the resilience of the human body. I used to be in personal training and physical rehab, and I was amazed to discover how fragile we are. That the human physiology can be broken by such petty things. It can be permanently damaged, irreparable sometimes. But at the same time, there's this paradox that the human body is so utterly resilient. But what's the variable? I think it's the will, of course, but there has to be the engagement of the heart, that simply the mind alone will not animate your body tissue to resurrect or to heal. It has to be done through deep feeling, through deep receptivity to a divine force. For ourselves, it's not the intellect that can transform our lives or that can transform our past bad karma into spirituality, but it's receptivity and it's devotion, because then we receive that superpower from God. It's interesting. I was listening to a physicist, and he was explaining how that there is no power that mankind can touch in a physical plane that does not come from the sun. I thought that was very interesting. And he pointed out fossil fuel is actually originally stored energy derived from the sun, because fossil fuel was originally plant matter that took its energy from sunlight and then through photosynthesis captured it and condensed it into a denser form, which was then buried underground for thousands of years and transformed into oil, which then we take that very condensed form of energy and we burn it. What he was saying is we can cut out the middleman and go straight for the sunlight as a much more direct source of energy and power. And he pointed out that even like wind power turbines are generated because of the currents of air, but that those currents of air are a result of the rise and falling temperatures generated by the rise and fall of the sun. That even the flow of water is because of the water evaporated from the ocean and then falling in the mountains, which of course is done by the sun evaporating water. And so he was saying the most direct way to generate energy and power is to go straight to the source. And I thought, of course, it makes so much sense. We think that we as individuals need to burn the fossil fuel of doing more yoga postures or eating more kale or things like that to be able to transform our lives. But those are all merely condensations of that divine power of the divine sun. And chanting or awakening the heart is that primary way of turning yourself into a solar panel to learn to receive the divine light directly rather than through a long chain of condensation and materialization of the divine force. And so what's interesting and beautiful to contemplate is Patanjali promises that the heart's capability to receive subtle vibration is infinite. That he says his promise for the practice of introspection is that through subtle introspection and through finely attuning our heart's frequency to subtler and subtler frequencies of consciousness, he says that eventually the siddhi we generate is the ability to commune with the devas, to commune with the gods, and commune with the masters, and ultimately to commune with God himself. But we don't receive that power by simply banging out techniques or dry repetition of formulas. It's done through refining the heart. which is the primary objective of devotional practices. And chanting, as we all probably know, Yogananda said, is half the battle, because when we simply open the heart and learn to live more in that state of love, that divine love transforms us directly from the inside out. And that presence of Divine Mother is so essential on the spiritual path, especially in this age of Dwapara Yuga. I had a revelation during my own living discipleship last summer when I realized that even though I was incredibly diligent about pretty much every technique Yogananda taught, I wasn't practicing the Om technique daily. And so for the duration of my living discipleship program, I practiced Om technique daily, sometimes up to several hours a day. And I tried to tune into the living vibration of Om. And I realized that by tuning into that Om vibration, by tuning into the Divine Mother, it awakened my heart. That Om technique teaches receptivity of the heart and receptivity to the Divine Feminine, who's always around us, who's always within us. And I realized that to think I could progress spiritually without the benedictions of my Divine Mother was in fact spiritual hubris. That it would be like trying to think you could pick yourself up by your bootstraps. But it doesn't matter how many times you yank on your shoelaces, you're not going anywhere. But it's the vivifying power of Divine Mother coming into your body, into your atoms, into your heart, that gives you the power, that gives you the grace to transform. And it's interesting that we don't have to look further than our own human experience to realize this truth. One of my favorite things about yoga is that whatever is true in the microcosm is true in the macrocosm, and vice versa. That truth is eternal. It doesn't matter the scope of its representation. And so if you want to think of the vivifying, transformative, motivating power of love, just think about when you fell in love, when you feel that deep feeling of love in your heart for another human being. You know, the classic stories of like Romeo and Juliet, where Romeo basically like loses his mind because he's so infatuated with Juliet, and he's able to do things that he wouldn't otherwise do, and he's filled with courage and dedication to a cause very suddenly and completely. But in our own lives, when we fall in love, don't you feel this incredible expansion of the heart? Don't you feel awake and ready? Even if, you know, you go and you see your beloved and you spend all night talking and you sleep for 2 hours and then you go to work the next day and you still feel joyful and awake and ready? Where does that energy come from? It's because you are receiving that cosmic flow of love a little more purely for those moments. And then usually what happens is the human heart becomes becomes acclimated to the presence of their beloved over time, and we lose some of that feeling. But if we practice consciously, always giving love, then we open ourselves to that flow of energy. And so that's why I was saying at the beginning when we chanted the first chant, Thou art my life, I said chant it as if you were trying to woo your divine beloved. Because when we give love first to God, we open ourselves to receive it. And you'll find that you are drawn upwards in like a magic carpet into the divine arms when you yourself try to give that love to God. And Yogananda said, this is one of my favorite quotes I've been meditating on recently, is he said, each one of you must individually make love to God. And I've heard that quote many times, as I'm sure many of us have, but it only occurred to me recently how very intimate that is, of course. But really think about that. What level of intimacy and tenderness and care and love and affection and attention does that imply? And what if we could learn to chant in that way? What if we could learn to pray in that way? What if we could learn to live in that way constantly, that we are constantly like a lover pining for their beloved, making love with their beloved in our meditation, in our chanting, in our prayer? Then that will invoke such an incredible response of the heart that you will be drawn into a deeper and deeper awareness of the divine presence. And then it's not work anymore. It's divine joy, that you don't have to convince a new starstruck lover that he wants to go see his beloved. Like, you can barely restrain him from it. And the same is with us. When that divine romance truly becomes real, The yogi can barely contain himself from sitting down and meditating, or from chanting spontaneously to his beloved, or seeing her in the light dancing on the leaves, or in the swaying of the trees and the light on the flowers. And so this is really how we, through opening the heart, we learn to lead a mystical life, the divine romance. And then everything becomes a play ultimately between you and your divine beloved. And as Nai Swami Bharat put it in a beautiful Sunday service I was blessed to attend a few years ago, he said, at first everything is the play between you and the divine beloved, and that you see everything as a reflection of God's love coming to you and you offering yourself to them. But then over time, you begin to realize that the divine beloved is actually playing all parts, and that it's actually God is singing through your heart as well. And then he made it sound as if that's when we surrender ego consciousness and we get to merge into that prem, into that divine love. What I was beginning to say at the beginning, this is not only a sweet practice to undergo, it's the prime objective of yoga, is to open and awaken the heart's energy and offer that heart's energy up to God. Because as Patanjali also promises, I love reading through Swami's Raja Yoga book, because in that he outlines what Patanjali promises for each of the yamas and niyamas. And he gives great powers. You know, the power for tapasya is to develop such incredible yogic siddhi powers that you could create or destroy universes with a moment of will, because you become so powerful. But after all of these incredible displays of spiritual power, the final one for devotion, the supreme power of perfect devotion, is that you're drawn into God's consciousness, that the divine beloved can no longer resist you and comes to you. And isn't that the goal of everything we're trying to do, is magnetize ourselves so completely that we are drawn into that ray? And so opening the heart is not a secondary concern for the yogi, but is a primary objective. And furthermore, not only is it a primary objective for your own happiness, for your own well-being, for your own sadhana, but it is the ultimate tool to be a channel for light and grace into the world. Because like I was saying at the beginning, we don't want to just be weathermen. We don't want to just see a storm coming. We want to be weather makers. But we do not possess that power. Only God possesses that power. But by attuning ourselves through devotion, through opening the heart, that divine beloved can flow through us. And we can sort of, I watched a play, a production of Ananda schools at Ananda Village. They did a production of the Ramayana. And they had this very charming scene when some Brahmin was propitiating Vishnu to come take material form to destroy Ravana, the demon king. And Vishnu wasn't really buying it in this rendition of the play. The Brahmin was like, oh, please, Vishnu, please come and take incarnation and help us and destroy darkness. And Vishnu was sitting there and was thinking to himself, well, maybe I could, but on the other hand, I'm engrossed in bliss and I don't really need to. But his wife, Lakshmi, it was so perfect. The whole audience burst out laughing because she turns to him and, like a nagging wife, it was just so perfect. She said, you promised that when vice predominates, that you would incarnate. And it was just so classic. And then after her little ramble, Vishnu sort of slumped and said, so be it. But we can become like that nagging wife of the divine beloved and say, you promised me. You promised me your heart. You promised me your love. You promised me your protection. Where is it? I demand that you make your presence known in my life and in the lives of others. And when that is not presumption, but when that is truly based on the bedrock of your faith, because of your deep experience, that's the faith that can shake mountains, because then the divine can't resist you. And when you call with that sort of fervor, with that sort of love, God responds. And this is very real. And I encourage all of you to explore this relationship, this personal, loving relationship with God, until it becomes truly real for you. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to take one of Yogananda's chants, right, or Swami's chants, which they spiritualized with great divine power, and chant it without end for great periods of time. I've taken chants for 6 months at a time where I'll chant it for hours a day until I penetrate through the veil of my awareness into a deeper experience of God's consciousness epitomized by that chant. But then once you pierce through that veil, there's always like a little hole there where you can peer through into the eyes of your beloved. The chant, the mantra Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, I chanted every day for like 6 or 7 hours in preparation for Diwali for about a month, for 40 days. I chanted that mantra, Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, set to Swamiji's melody for, like I said, 6 to 7 hours a day, because I was just doing some manual labor at the time. It wasn't like I didn't have a very intellectual job that I needed my attention, so I could. And I chanted that way relentlessly, every moment I could. Or every moment I wasn't chanting, I was doing japa under the table, just calling out to Lord Rama. And after that 40 days, on the day of Diwali, I was sitting in the Temple of Light at Ananda Village, and I walked in there and I closed my eyes and I felt such an expectation of joy, because I felt that at any moment Lord Rama might literally burst through the doors at the back of the Temple of Light and stride down the aisle and ascend the altar and bless everyone. It felt so real. It felt like his presence was just around the corner. And that evening I led a Diwali celebration, and we lit all the candles, and there was no power at the time. We were having power outages. But people came together and we chanted to Lord Rama, and I could feel his benedictions, his blessings on everyone. And ever since that experience, whenever I chant these chants to Lord Rama, I feel his presence. Even if it's not as deeply as then, it comes more quickly. And I feel that he protects me when I ask him to. We can do this with any of the chants. We can do this with any of the masters until we have such a close rapport with them, heart to heart, that we know that we never live alone. I am, through devotion, through faith, and through relentlessly banging on the door of our gurus, I had a great experience of divine intervention. And the reason I'm sharing this is because we're in a period of our lives and in the period of the world, that we need some divine intervention. But to claim divine intervention that is unfounded on faith is merely pretentious. That we have to have that bedrock of love and experience to be able to really call out sincerely and with great power. A few years ago, one of my brothers was about to have another child. And for whatever reason, they asked if they could name their child after me. And I felt like there was some karmic connection with this boy. And of course, I told them that they were welcome to. But they told me that there were some complications, that they thought that this child might be born with some severe birth defects, and maybe it looked like he had indicators of being mentally handicapped, perhaps even very severely handicapped. And I said, don't worry about it. Of course you can name him after me. I'd be deeply honored. And I felt after I hung up the phone that I needed to start praying to Babaji and our masters to intercede on behalf of my new nephew. So we have to live a balance between demanding of God to fix our petty problems and also having faith in divine grace to do that which is right. And so I prayed, not asking for any particular outcome. My prayer was, I just hammered at the gate of Babaji's door and demanded that he bless my nephew, that he surround him in his light, that he surround him in his grace. And I never asked for any outcome. I just said, be with him. And I took up a very intense regimen of japa. And as it happened, I went on a backpacking trip, which is a great opportunity for me to practice japa. And for about 8 hours a day, while I was hiking through the God-reminding hills of Yosemite, I had a mala in my hand, and I just chanted relentlessly, Om Babaji, Om Babaji, Om Babaji, Om Babaji, Om Lahiri, Om Lahiri. And I went through all of the masters nonstop, constantly, every single moment that I could remember of the day. It was at least 7 hours. And I never asked for anything for myself. I just asked that their grace surround him. And I did that for about 3 or 4 days. And on the fourth day, I climbed up to a mountain peak with my other family members, and we got some cell phone reception, and we received a message from my brother that the nephew had an emergency, that there was an emergency happening, that his umbilical cord had been detached, and that he was bleeding internally and had to be rushed to the hospital for an immediate emergency C-section. And we don't have to get too far into the story. What basically ended up happening, it was a miraculous birth, that he had like a 1 in 10 million chance of having all the different things that went wrong happen, and he had all of them happen. He was born 3 months premature, but it was a miracle that he was even born at all, and that he survived, and that when he was born, they discovered that there was in fact nothing wrong with his brain. He had a heart defect that they knew about, but he was able to be saved by some incredible skills of some surgeons and lived. And there we were on the top of this mountain, and the rest of my family was crushed by this news, because at the time we didn't know if he was going to live. We just knew that he had this emergency C-section. But I felt intuitively that that had been a direct answer to my prayer. And I went back down the mountain alone, and I was walking through the woods, and I remembered that story and autobiography of a yogi when Sri Yukteswar goes to Lahiri Mahashaya, and as he enters his ashram, Lahiri says to him, "Oh, Sri Yukteswar, did you see Babaji on your way in?" And Sri Yukteswar says, "No, sir, I did not see anyone on my way in." And then Babaji materializes and says, "Oh, Sri Yukteswar, your mind is restless. You need to meditate more, for you did not see me hiding behind the rays of sunshine." There I was walking down the mountains alone after engaging in this intense practice of mantra and japa and prayer. And I was feeling that this had been a blessing from Babaji. And there, as the light was dancing through the trees at sunset, and you can see the rays of light a little more clearly, I remembered that story. And even though I couldn't see Babaji, I imagined that there he was, standing before me, hidden behind the rays of sunshine. And I got down on my knees, and I imagined that I was kneeling before him, and I touched his feet, and I said thank you, because I felt that he had interceded on behalf of my nephew and had saved his life. And as I did that, I felt his answer in my heart. And the words that came to me were, "I, who created all fatherly love, how could I let your prayers fall upon deaf ears?" And it was clear as day. And I was so moved, because of course that's God. That's Babaji, the revered father, I who made all fatherly love. How could I let your prayers fall upon deaf ears? And so the divine is constantly, the divine is our beloved friend, our closest friend, nearer than the near, dearer than the dear. But we forget to call out because our love is not yet strong enough to remember. When push comes to shove, when our lives disintegrate, is your first reaction to call to God for help? To go like a child wailing for the protection of their father, for their mother, for their beloved, their lover? Or is our first reaction to implode upon ourselves and try to fix the problem with our own hands? The problem is not divine love. The problem is our receptivity to it. And so if the masters created all fatherly love, all motherly love, all love in the entire universe, why wouldn't they be ever willing to intercede on our behalf and to intercede on behalf of the others in our lives? Of course they are. You know, Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita cheats. He breaks his own word to help Arjuna. He intercedes because of Arjuna's sincerity. And so, above all, let's cultivate sincerity, devotion, and openness of heart until we feel that we truly are in a living divine romance every moment of our day. And there are very simple ways to practice this. Like, how would you live a human romance? When you get up in the morning, wouldn't you be sweet to your lover? Wouldn't you smile and say good morning and offer your tenderness and your love and caress their hair and tell them they were beautiful? So do that with God. Offer your sweetness to God. When you chant, try to offer the very best of what you are. When you suffer, offer your suffering to God. When you see something beautiful, share that beautiful experience with God. When you're making a decision, just like you would share a decision you are making with your spouse or with your lover, share that decision with God. And the more you do that, the closer that divine relationship will become. I do simple things to remind myself of this, because I heard someone say sort of flippantly, they said, "Oh, I'm in a relationship with God." And they just sort of moved on. And I thought, wait, but what does that really mean? Because we all know in human relationships, it takes great work to nurture them and to keep them alive. But how much work and nurturing do we give to our divine relationship to keep it alive? You know, we talk constantly to God, harassing him for favors and help, but how much do we listen like a good partner? And so one thing I've started doing, and I offer this just as an anecdote to inspire all of us to find simple ways to integrate our lives more completely with God, but I've started going on walks almost every night whenever I'm able, after the sun's gone down, and I go for a walk with Divine Mother, with my divine lover, and I pray to her constantly. And I try to feel her presence, and I try to feel her presence in the rays of the moonlight. I try to see her beauty in the sparkling of the stars. I try to walk with her. I try to keep her in my mind with every breath I breathe. And it's become such a sweet practice for me that it's become very real, and it's helped open my heart to the point where suddenly, sitting with friends, I have felt my heart feel like it could almost explode at any moment, because I felt such sudden and unexplainable love for them. Love from them, for them, with them, by them, through them, from God. And then when I'm thrilled to think that if I can continue in this way, in this practice, that eventually I truly will be able to see the smiling face of my divine beloved, laughing in every experience and in every person. And then what's there to fear anymore? What's there to cling to? What's there to be anxious of? Then it's just a constant adventure in increasing bliss. So I guess in conclusion, I'll say, take the process of opening your heart very seriously, but not heavily, lightly. But give it consideration. What can you do? What techniques can you employ? What habits can you develop that will help you actualize your personal divine romance with God? That's not dependent upon anyone else. That's not dependent upon any circumstance. That's not dependent upon anything. That is just your heart seeing to God constantly. And whatever that is that you can do that. And it will, I believe, that it will greatly enhance your sadhana, your meditation, your relationships, just your overall joy. So I think that seems like a nice place to end. You have to win yourself to any given task. That I was just thinking about this the other day. Willpower, like grim willpower alone, will never go the distance. I mean, you perhaps, or I should say, my grim willpower alone won't go the distance. I'll burn out. If we go on like the fiery power of our own human will alone, it dries the heart. And over time, that dries our motivation to keep going. What we need to do is we need to open the heart by our own experience. It was interesting. I was a bit of a rascal for a few years in my younger days. And, you know, I chased extracurricular experiences and all sorts of things. But what made me stop was when I started meditating, I realized I enjoyed the experience of meditating more than I enjoyed the experience of drugs. And when I have chanted deeply and I felt the touch of divine love in my heart, I enjoy that feeling of love more than I enjoy the feeling of sorrow. And so what I've done is I think all I've really done is I've learned how to put the carrot in front of my own face and say, you like this carrot, so here it is, now run and go for it. And Willpower is developed over time. I think really it's just that we have to convince ourselves that we're capable of these things. Yogananda said to develop will, pick one thing that you've never accomplished before and achieve it. And don't give up until you do. And then after you complete it, pick a slightly larger task and then complete it until eventually you convince yourself that you can do anything and that your will is unlimited. But one of my mentors said something to me that I thought was so effective. And he said, it's not willpower that gets you out of bed in the morning, it's love. And it's not willpower that will sit you down on your bench in the morning, it's love. And it's not willpower alone that got me through 8 hours of japa, it's love. And so one of the things I can offer is like I was saying, yes, I did 8 hours of japa every day, but it was because I loved my nephew. Even though I'd never held him before, my heart went out to him. And when the heart is engaged, you can move mountains. This is why mothers, have been seen to flip cars over to get at their child because their heart is fully engaged. And so what I would say is, don't worry about your current level of will or intensity or dedication. Don't worry about it not one bit, but just focus all of your concentration on your own individual experience of God and nurture that, cling to that, write about that in your journal every night, muse about that, fantasize about that like you would about your divine lover, until that motivates you to take the next step. That you'll say, I want to feel peace so badly. I'm willing to practice Hong Sa for 15 minutes, okay? I'm finally willing to do it. Or I want to feel the presence of Divine Mother so badly, I'm willing to try practicing Om. And just to be clear, my life's like tapasya kind of goes in waves. I'm not energizing 6 times a day right now. I'm not meditating for 4 hours a day right now. I energize once a day. And frankly, my meditations are like, the last soldiers clinging to their flag in defiance of the world. Like I because of the vigorous quality of my schedule and service right now, I probably meditate an hour a day, which is not very much compared to what it used to be. But because I'm so hungry for God, I find the time to pray. I am engaged in japa throughout the day, and I go for those moonlit walks with Divine Mother. And so even though my outward trapping or my outward sadhana is less, my heart is open. And so I think that's what I would say. Chase bliss, not achievement. I have an avid imagination. And one thing that I like to say often is just imagine, what do you think superconscious experience could be like? And sort of let that experience make you salivate and like really wonder, how sweet could it be? Like I often ask myself, what would it really be like if Master literally appeared before me? What would I do? How would that feel? What would that experience be like? And so when I was chanting, when I do these japa for these long hours, because my mind wanders like hello all the time, I've gotten to the point where I can do japa with one part of my brain, and the other part of my brain can be like rambling about blah, 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 blah. But of course, to get the most out of it, we need to do it with our complete concentration. And so it just comes back to sort of the analogy I said before, is I need to keep dangling a carrot in front of my head that says, this is what I'm going for, and I really, really want it. That's really the secret, is you got to make yourself want it. And so I just imagine, or like I try to recall an experience where I felt divine love, or I try to experience when I felt love or bliss or whatever. And as Swami said, if you want to feel joy, don't wait for joy, but pray with joy. And so when I was chanting to Lord Rama, I would be outside and I would just be imagining, like, what would it truly be like if he came here? How joyful would I be? And then I tried to chant with that joy. What a deep blessing it would be, and so on like that. And then the amazing thing is, it's sort of like a closed circuit, that I trick myself into being open to the possibility of a deeper experience. And then by my sincerity and by repetition and by a whole heap of God's grace, you actually experience a deeper experience. And then that becomes fuel for your imagination to wonder, well, now hang on a minute. if I did japa for 6 hours today and I felt this moment of divine love, what would it be like if I could feel that divine love all the time? What would happen to my consciousness? And then you hear things like Swamiji say things, I am in a state of bliss that doesn't change whether I'm awake or asleep. And that sounds a lot like the chant, night and day in thy joy, oh my Lord. And I go, hey, that sounds pretty good. I'll take two. And then that can motivate the heart to keep being a little more sincere. But to me, it's just like I have to cling to the joy of an experience. And so that's why, like I mentioned, journaling, for example, people journal about their day, but like, what if you took like a virtual gratitude journal and wrote down like every beautiful experience that ever happened? Because that'll solidify it in your consciousness and it'll make it more real. And then it won't feel like you're chasing, fairy dust, but you're chasing a very real experience. So that's sort of how I've been approaching it.